abducted last month, found in a building near Al-Shifa Hospital. The Israeli military continues to search that hospital, where today it found more proof, it says, that Hamas was using this as a command center, including a tunnel shaft and a vehicle with weapons.
As you can see, they were very well prepared, and where they're hiding all of this equipment is in a hospital, a place that's supposed to be for humanitarian aid.
Al-Shifa can no longer receive new patients, and so they flee in their thousands, streaming southwards, setting up temporary shelter, only to be told today by Israeli soldiers that they must evacuate again. But if they stay, they risk becoming part of the soaring death toll, which the Hamas-run health ministry puts at around 11,500. That is one out of every 200 Palestinians.
It's not about the numbers, it's about eliminating evil.
And CBS News has learned that Israel is considering a deal that would see Hamas release some women and children in exchange for a 3 to 5 day ceasefire, and possibly some Palestinian women and children, Nora, being held in Israeli prisons.
Deborah Patek, thank you. We turn now to our exclusive interview with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about those hostage negotiations and Israel's long-term plan for the Gaza Strip. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for being here on the CBS Evening News.
Thank you.
CBS News has learned that there is a deal on the table to free hostages in exchange for a 3 to 5 day ceasefire. How close are you to bringing some of the hostages home?
Well, we're closer than we were before we began the ground action, because the ground action has put pressure on Hamas to achieve a ceasefire. We'll have a temporary ceasefire if we can get our hostages back. I don't think it serves that purpose for me to elaborate further on that. We're doing every effort. It's part of our, our three war goals. One, to destroy Hamas. Second, to bring back our hostages to Israel. And third, to ensure that that threat, that terrorist threat, never arises again from Gaza, and that Gaza has a different future, better for us, for the Palestinians, and for the entire Middle East. So bringing back the hostages is an integral part of our war goals, and we're doing everything we can to achieve it.
But to be clear, are you considering a limited ceasefire?
I said that we would have a temporary ceasefire only if we have our hostages back, and I haven't changed what I said.
And would Israel agree to release Palestinian prisoners in exchange for hostages?
Nora, I don't think it helps. You can ask me, and that's your job. You're a journalist, and you should inquire. But I think there are certain things that we're holding as confidential until we have something to tell. And when we do, if we do, you and the entire world will know about it, including the hostage families.
This is the first chance to hear from you since the targeted raid on Al-Shifa Hospital. If Hamas is using a hospital as a command center, that is a war crime. Do you have concrete evidence?
Of course. First of all, we had concrete evidence that there were terrorist chieftains and terrorists, their terrorist minions, in the hospital. And in fact, they fled. As our forces approached, they fled. That's why we had no firefight. We entered that hospital with Arabic-speaking Israeli doctors, with incubators, and we had no firefight. But Hamas was using the patients in that hospital as a human shield. And on level -2, we found a command and control center, military communications, coded equipment. We found bombs, we found weapons, and we also found terror tunnels in the hospital compound. Now we're doing this very gingerly because we're trying to do the moral thing, the right thing, to deprive Hamas of having this safe zone in a hospital, but at the same time to neutralize its use as a command center for terrorists. And so far we've achieved it. I'm glad to say that we've been able to do that. We talked to the hospital administration. We told them we're coming in. Make sure that no one is there, no one is hurt. And so far we've achieved that. And I hope we'll continue to achieve that as we finish the job.
Where are the hostages being held? Do you know?
We had strong indications that they were held in the Shifa hospital, which is one of the reasons we entered the hospital. If they were taken out. We have intelligence about the hostages, but again, as to your first question, I think the less I say about it, the better.
Mr. Prime Minister, you've noted that one goal of the war is to de-radicalize Gaza. But does the violence and the killing of thousands of innocent civilians fuel a future generation of hatred?
First of all, any civilian death is a tragedy. And we shouldn't have any, because we're doing everything we can to get the civilians out of harm's way, while Hamas is doing everything to keep them in harm's way. So we send leaflets, we call them on their cell phone, we say, leave. And many have left, but Hamas tried to stop them at gunpoint and fired at the safe corridors that we provided for the Palestinians. So they don't give a hoot about the Palestinians. They think they're safe in the underground, this messianic, theological, mad cult that is fighting below, and they're saying that, you know, damn the Palestinians above. We don't say that. We do everything we can to have them leave. That's what we're doing. The other thing that I can say is that we'll try to finish that job with minimal civilian casualties. That's what we're trying to do. Minimal civilian casualties, but unfortunately, we're not successful. I'll give you a parallel, because the German
Mr. Prime Minister, I know we don't have much time, so I do want to ask you about the future of Gaza. President Biden has made it clear to you that it would be a big mistake to occupy Gaza. Do you disagree with President Biden?
We want overall military responsibility to prevent the reemergence of terror. We're not seeking to occupy. That's not our goal. But our goal is to make sure that what happens there is different. To do that, we have to demilitarize Gaza, and we have to de-radicalize Gaza, just as you had to have a different future. You know, after the conquest of Germany, you de-radicalized, denazify Germany. After the conquest of Japan, you made sure that the aggressive policies of Imperial Japan are different. There was a cultural change. We need a cultural change here. We can't have a civilian administration enter Gaza that will not fight terrorists, that is committed to funding terrorists as opposed to fighting terrorists, that uses pay for slay, that teaches its children the way Hamas teaches its children. Israel has to be dissolved. That can't work. We can't go back to failed strategies. There has to be a different regime and a different future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. That's what will give hope to Palestinians. We liberate them from Hamas, liberate them from this tyranny, give them a real future, and that requires the destruction of Hamas.
And move forward on a two-state solution.
And move forward to make sure you don't have a terrorist state. Make sure that you don't have a state that teaches its children that you have to destroy Israel. And I say, let the Palestinians have all the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers to threaten Israel. And that means not only making sure that Gaza is demilitarized, but also that Gaza is de-radicalized. And if you ask me, we need a different civilian leadership than the one that has been offered to the Palestinians today.
Mr. Prime Minister, President Biden also says that extremist settlers attacking Palestinians in the West Bank is pouring gasoline on fire. Will you hold those settlers in the West Bank accountable for violence?
We hold anyone taking the law into their own hands or committing vigilante violence. That is out. We cannot accept that. I mean, that is, I've said that in Hebrew, I've said that in English, I've said that in podcasts, and I'm saying it to you again. I think I've said that to the community leaders in Judea and Samaria. And by the way, they agree with me, because 99.9% of the settler community are law-abiding, solid citizens. They pay their taxes, they serve in the army. These are families that are law-abiding families. You have a tiny fraction, and most of them are teenagers that actually come outside of Judea and Samaria. And they should be held accountable. But I wouldn't make a false symmetry between the hundreds and hundreds of terrorist attacks, including just today, right at the outskirts of Jerusalem, of the Hamas sympathizers and terrorists who come and shoot people, innocent people. And we take care to fight against them. So the degree of this extremist violence is tiny, but even a tiny amount is unacceptable to us. That's the difference. And you know how it's tested? More, this is it. This is the big one. I condemn these actions, but the Palestinian leadership, the Palestinian Authority leadership today, President Abbas, 40 days into this horror, the worst horrors perpetrated on Jews since the Holocaust, the rape and murder of women, the slaughter of children in front of their parents and parents in front of their children, the burning of babies, the beheading of women. He has yet to condemn it. I condemn any kind of violence that is perpetrated, any kind of extremist violence. He not only does not condemn it, but his officials laud it. That's the difference. There is no symmetry between Israel and its foes.
Mr. Prime Minister, I understand our time is up. I hope you will join us again on CBS. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Appreciate it.
President Biden spoke to CEOs and posed for a class photo with world leaders today at the Asia-Pacific Economic Summit in San Francisco. This follows his high-stakes meeting on Wednesday with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Xi pledged to crack down on the production of fentanyl ingredients and to restore military communications with the U.S. For more on the historic summit, Secretary of State Antony Blinken joins us from San Francisco. Secretary Blinken, thank you for joining us on this busy day. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Nora. Thanks.
You attended the meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and after the summit, President Xi said China is ready to be a partner and friend of the United States. Do you see China as a partner and friend of the U.S.?
Nora, this is one of the most consequential relationships we have, one of the most consequential relationships between any two countries in the world. And we have an obligation to try to responsibly manage that relationship. Yesterday, we agreed that our militaries would start talking again at the most senior levels and at the operational level. And this is a very important way of trying to avoid a miscalculation, a mistake that could lead to conflict. Second, in terms of actually making a difference in the lives of the American people, the #1 killer of Americans aged 18 to 49 is fentanyl. Not car accidents, not guns, not cancer, it's fentanyl. And what's happened is the chemical precursors, the ingredients used to make fentanyl, have been coming from China, going to the Western Hemisphere, turned into fentanyl, and coming into the United States. We now have an agreement with China to take concrete action against the companies that are engaged in this practice.
Well, how can we trust that China is going to carry through with that crackdown on those chemicals that are sent to Mexico that then are turned into fentanyl?
As the President said yesterday, trust but verify. And that's what we're doing.
Secretary Blinken, when President Biden called President Xi a dictator last night, there were cameras on you and you looked visibly uncomfortable. China today called that wrong and irresponsible. What was going through your mind, and is that the position of the U.S. government?
Well, it's not exactly a secret that we have two very different systems. And the President always speaks candidly, and he speaks for all of us. Look, it's clear that we will continue to say things and continue to do things that China doesn't like, just as I assume that they will continue to do and say things that we don't like. But what's so important about the meeting yesterday, about all the work we've been doing over the last 6 months to make sure that we're engaged diplomatically with them, is precisely to make sure that for the things that really matter, pursuing this competition in a way that doesn't become conflict, managing our differences, and also looking for areas of cooperation.
Mr. Secretary, thank you.
Thanks.
And the other thing we learned from the meeting is the pandas may be coming back to the United States. All right, moving on to the day's other top stories, a scathing report on Congressman George Santos and the verdict for the man who attacked Nancy Pelosi's husband with a hammer.
Back. Thank you. And thank you. And before we go, a quick programming note. Tonight, NBC News investigates the rise of anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. Hosted by Jacob Soboroff, watch Epidemic of Hate, Anti-Semitism on the Rise tonight at 10:30 p.m. Eastern, streaming on NBC News Now. That is tonight's readout. All In with Chris Hayes starts now.
Tonight on All In.
Offer me money. Offer me power. I don't care.
As anti-Semitism and hate grow around the country.
I'll say what I want to say, and if the consequence of that is losing money, so be it.
Tonight, the dangerous implications of the world's richest man suggesting Jews stoke hatred of white people. Ben.
I'll indulge you this. I just discovered what OnlyFans was about 3 weeks ago.
Will George Santos get bounced from Congress in the wake of today's devastating ethics report?
most people lie on their resumes. It's just, unfortunately, it's the reality.
Yeah, but you lied about everything.
Plus, how the judge in the stolen documents case is once again delaying justice. And Biden National Security spokesman John Kirby on what we know about the Israeli raid on Shifa Hospital. But All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. One of the most distressing elements of these anguishing past 41 days since the horrific events of October 7th and the start of the brutal and bloody war between Israel and Hamas is the marked rise in anti-Semitic incidents around the world and right here in the U.S. The Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism documented 832 anti-Semitic incidents of assault, vandalism, and harassment in the U.S. in just 4 weeks following the attack. It comes out to an average of nearly 28 incidents per day and represents a 316% increase over the same period last year. You could just see it, in any city you live. Just here in New York City, anti-Semitic hate crimes surged 214% in the month of October. Across the country, we've seen synagogues and Jewish schools, Jewish centers, even a Jewish cemetery defaced, vandalized. People have torn down flyers bringing attention to the more than 220 hostages kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. A lot of these incidents have taken place under cover of night or behind the relative anonymity of a screen. But yesterday, the wealthiest man in the world made one of the most shocking public pronouncements of anti-Semitism I've seen. And he did it on the platform that he owns. I'm speaking, of course, of Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX and Tesla, who purchased Twitter last year, changed his name, and promptly managed to lose $25 billion on it. Musk brought his hard right views to the platform, where he elevated the most loathsome offensive bigots. He welcomed back outright and avowed neo-Nazis who'd been banned from the website. He's defended white supremacists, complained about racism against white people. He compared Jewish billionaire George Soros to a Jewish Marvel supervillain. With Elon Musk's attention and encouragement, those with the most despicable views have essentially taken over the platform now known as X. This is a man with enormous power and influence well beyond the internet. He's one of the most powerful private citizens in the world. Just yesterday, Musk attended a cocktail hour with Chinese President Xi Jinping that followed the bilateral meeting with President Joe Biden. Musk also has the ear of top U.S. officials who welcome him like royalty anytime he descends on Washington. And so it's this man who took to his website yesterday to endorse the most violent, dangerous anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Now, it all began with a person who describes himself as a Jewish conservative, expressing his anger about that recent rise of anti-Semitism. He addresses the, quote, cowards hiding behind the anonymity of the internet and posting Hitler was right, and calls for them to step out of the shadows and, quote, say it to our faces. And that prompted a reply from another user who wrote, okay, right? Responding, okay, say it to your faces. People think Hitler was right. Okay, I'll talk to you. Jewish communities have been pushing the exact kind of dialectical hatred against whites they claim to want people to stop using against them. You want truth said to your face, there it is. I wish I could say this was a fringe view, but is a viled and over century-old anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Basically, that Jewish people, in coordination with people of color, are a kind of conspiracy to assault whiteness. And in fact, that Jews are behind this conspiracy. This same conspiracy, which has sort of come to be known as the Great Replacement Theory, that Jews are the sort of puppet masters manipulating American immigration policy to replace white people, this has permeated into a large swath of the American right. We saw it in Charlottesville, most infamously in the 2017, where the marchers chanted, Jews will not replace us. It was this view that was the inspiration for the perpetrator of the horrific anti-Semitic mass murder at the Tree of Life Synagogue in 2018. The killer said so himself. So Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, one of the most powerful and influential men in the world, the owner of this platform, replied to the post espousing that vile theory, replied to this post that replied to someone calling out those who think Hitler is right and said, okay, he says this to the guy that said that theory, you have said the actual truth. The actual truth. Jews coordinating this assault on whiteness. So shocking and repellent that Elon Musk, a man of the highest echelons of our society, would not just say something like that, but actually believe it. It's a reminder that anti-Semitism is dangerous and enduring even at the very highest levels of American society. And we should be clear, there's a real history of this in this country. Many notable, powerful American figures through the ages were just rank anti-Semites. Probably the most notorious example is actually a man who's probably the closest historical analog to Elon Musk in many ways, Henry Ford. Of course, Ford was the founder of the Ford Motor Company, the perfecter of assembly line production, one of the wealthiest and most influential men of the earliest 20th century, one of the great industrialists of the world history. And he was also, as many people know, an anti-Semite. But the zealousness, the viciousness with which he pursued that cause of hating Jews, the cause of global persecution of Jewish people, that I think has been a bit underemphasized in our collective recollection. It's not an asterisk to Henry Ford's legacy, it's right at the center. In fact, before the rise of Adolf Hitler, Henry Ford was probably the most powerful anti-Semite in the world. This is a topic of Rachel Maddow's remarkable new book, Prequel, about fascist sympathizers in the United States around World War II and those who defeated them. And this past weekend, I got a chance to speak with Rachel for a live episode of my podcast, Why Is This Happening? And she read us an excerpt about Henry Ford's story.
He was one of the most successful and celebrated industrialists on the planet. His anti-Semitism was rank, and it was unchecked. He spewed it freely in private tirades among friends, family, close business cohorts, newspaper reporters, or pretty much anybody within earshot. Ford was hardly the only radical anti-Semite in the US circa 1920, but in addition to his fortune and his famous name and his iconic company, he had a megaphone your average crazy uncle theorizer lacked. He had Twitter. No, I'm kidding. Sorry. Sorry. It's X. I'm supposed to say X. Yeah. Sorry. He had a newspaper. It was called the Dearborn Independent. Every week for 92 weeks. Headlines like these. The International Jew, the world's problem. And Jewish jazz, moron music, becomes our national music. And this one. The perils of baseball. Too much Jew. His headlines were splashed onto the pages of Ford's paper, which was distributed in Ford dealerships across the country. Ford also saw to the publication of his series in book form. It was titled The International Jew. It ran to 4 volumes. The German edition of Ford's book had landed in the hands of one particularly gifted propagandist. When Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, was published in 1925, the author appeared to lift not just ideas, but whole passages from Ford's own publications. Mein Kampf's first edition extolled Ford by name. When a reporter from the Detroit News showed up at Nazi Party headquarters in Munich in December 1931 to interview Hitler, she had a series that was called 5 Minutes with Men in Public Eye. And she had her 5 minutes with Hitler. When she went to Hitler's office, she was surprised to find hanging on the wall behind Hitler's desk a large framed portrait of a very famous American. Hitler explained to the newspaper woman, "I regard Henry Ford as my inspiration."
Wild, right? Didn't know it until I read the book. And that was just part of our wide-ranging 2-hour conversation. If you want to hear more, you're in luck. The incredible WithPod episode will be streaming exclusively on Peacock starting this Friday, November 17th. Now, to be clear, Elon Musk is not at the Henry Ford level yet. There are real warning signs emanating from one of the world's most powerful men and from society at large. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. It's real. It's dangerous. In the case of Elon Musk, it is just staring us in the face. Yair Rosenberg is a staff writer at The Atlantic, where he wrote about Elon Musk's disturbing truth, and he joins me now. Yair, I suppose you're sort of a reporter who lives on the anti-Semitism beat. And so at some level, I suppose, not much can shock or surprise you. And I think also, given Elon Musk's trajectory of the last few years, one could say it's not shocking or surprising. But I have to say, I was shocked. I was genuinely shocked that this man wrote, "You have spoken the truth," to this. What was your reaction?
Yeah, so like you said, we have witnessed Elon descend down this sort of radicalization spiral on the internet, which is, I think, something we can all relate to in different ways. We've seen people, friends, intellectuals, mentors sometimes, who get sucked into a particular spot on the internet. And if it's a conspiratorial or dark place, they can start to sound and echo those things. So on the one hand, it's not unexpected, but on the other hand, of course, it's a devastating thing to have the wealthiest person on the planet, a person who is looked up to by many as an icon, a person who has done a tremendous amount to advance many fields of technology and industry, to say the same exact, to affirm the words that were basically the justification for the greatest mass murder of Jews on American soil.
You write this, and I thought this was a really profound insight. You say the fate of the tiny Jewish community rests in the hands of non-Jewish society. Whether the anti-Jewish ideas of Musk and others become the new normal is not up to Jews, it's up to everyone else. There is obviously just an incredibly intense set of conversations happening around anti-Semitism, around bigotry, about anti-Muslim bigotry, which is also documented to be on the rise in terms of hate incidents. But this idea that the sort of most pernicious aspect of all anti-Semitism is the conspiratorial notion that this tiny sliver of the population is actually controlling things, when in fact it is the majority of Americans who are going to decide whether they're going to be a decent country or not.
Yeah, the deep and profound irony of anti-Semitism is that it's an inverted world picture. It says that there's this tiny string-pulling Jewish minority that controls the massive non-Jewish majority. But throughout history, if you actually look, as logic would dictate, it's not the 0.2% of the world that's Jewish that runs the show. It's the 99.8% of the world that's not Jewish that makes the decisions and decides what happens to minorities like the Jews, and how they will, whether they will flourish or whether they will suffer, right, in our societies. And you know, that's part of what's frightening about this moment, is that you have somebody like Elon Musk who's pushing a particular way of thinking about that, right? Who is sort of amplifying that, marinating in that, and he's not creating it. He's actually reflecting something that's going on in our society today.
I actually disagree with what he just got through saying about the people being in control. The people that are in control are the ones that has brought on this contamination of those lukewarmers or the 1%ers that have now realized that, oh wow, we've already went into an area that we never should have explored off into, pertaining to us being $33 trillion in debt, and all the drugs coming over here pertaining to the fentanyl and all the gun violence and all the other stuff that's happening. Once more, whenever you're dealing with a society of a group of people, and I'm just going to point my finger at some of the preachers that I've talked to that I've known in the past 7, 8, 9, 10 years, they want to blame everything on God. It's God's fault. God's the one that brought this on. God's the one that done this. God's the one that done that. And what they don't realize is that there is a constant struggle between good and evil. And every now and then, evil will get its lick in towards doing something to somebody, or doing something to a society, or even a community, or even a country. And I'm not saying that God couldn't have stopped it, but whenever you have a group of people that continues to bite the hand of God, then God basically turns his back on the people and looks down at Lucifer and says, sick 'em, do your job. Sick 'em, do your job. In other words, we know that Satan is out to kill, steal, and destroy. This anti-Semitism has been growing now for the past, I guess, for the past 30 plus years, ever since the White House done what they done in the latter part of Ronald Reagan's administration, that it's just been growing and growing and growing. And it ain't just anti-Semitism. Understand something. It's not just those who are against the fanatics, or against those that are already got a title of being the chosen people of God, or the blessed people of God, or etc. But it's also those that have dibble-dabbled around in sorcery, paranormal behavior, stuff that I never would have thought would have been so predominant in today's society, especially over here in the Western world. And it's actually more predominant in Florida than it is anywhere else, pertaining to soothsayers, tarot card readers, Ouija board readers, fortune tellers, etc. I've never seen areas that was so inundated with such paranormal, spirituality hood than I have basically Florida. And the strongest evil demonic spirits that I've ever run across was the spirits out in California, other than me having to experience what I experienced towards Satan coming over here in Martin, Tennessee in 1988. And I basically felt the oppression of evil such as that I had never, ever, ever experienced before. And I had been around evil men and evil deeds of men doing evil things. And that was the most powerfulest of all powerful whenever I met Satan and his 12 disciples over here at an old restaurant that used to be called Tony's Pizza in 1988. So yes, evil is on the rise. Or you can look at it in another way, like Revelations talks about, that Satan will come down because he knoweth his time is short. Evil is coming down. It's either coming down or coming up, either or. It's exploding in magnitude. It's exploding in power. It's exploding in being more crafty. It's exploding towards being more deceitful. And these are only Bible prophecies that Jesus warned his Christians about, his followers about, that in the end times that there would be a great falling away. But he also promised that there would be a risation of his people, that he would rise them up in the last days. And that's where I believe the Windmill Ministries missions comes in at, towards, even though I've been battered, I've been hammered, I've been demoralized, I've been dehumanized, etc. Excuse me, I got a cold. I can't talk all that well right now. But I truly believe that good is going to conquer over bad, and that light will exceed over darkness. And I'll always believe that to the very day that I die. And I'm going to continue to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. I don't care if I got any converts. I don't care if I got one convert or 1,000,000 converts. I'm going to continue to believe what I believe, that I've been believing now since 1983, of the two hands that miraculously come out of heaven, that grabbed both of my wrists, that was cold in content, that whenever a 1979 Buick Regal come crashing down on top of me of approximately 4,000 pounds, that should have cut my torso, my body completely in half, that I seen metal bending around my body that is scientifically impossible. I lost 9 units of blood in less than 45 minutes. The doctor that operated on me 2 weeks afterward committed suicide. 2 weeks after that, my father attacked me towards trying to finish me off, even though I had 64 staples connecting both pieces of my stomach together, the skin together, 64 2-inch staples connecting my torso back together again. My father attacked me towards trying to finish me off. That's whenever I went to Kenton, Tennessee in 1983. I sought help over there towards trying to get the officials to help me. And the type of help that I got was basically being branded towards character assassination. And they basically patted my dad on the back and told him what kind of good job that he done. But they just probably wished that he would have went ahead and finished me off. I mean, I've known of these attacks that's been going on in our family now all my life, going all the way back into a little area called Antioch, Illinois, after we moved from Round Lake, Illinois, along about 1965. Been very, very familiar with these evangelical supernatural spirits. At the same time, I've been very, very familiar with these evil demonic spirits, because after my mother was given her vision or premonition where she said that she actually seen the Lord come into the living room, I don't know where I was. I may have been upstairs, downstairs. I may have been out in a sandbox. I don't know where I was, but I know that later on that afternoon, our house was full of a bunch of strangers, and there was about 25 cars out in the yard that I had no earthly idea towards what was happening. I just know this, that after that did happen, there was some weird things that started happening to us up in Antioch, Illinois. And I kind of feel like that was probably some sort of a sign to my dad, well, maybe it's time to move out of the big city and go back to the country. And that's whenever we come back to the country. But whenever we come back to the country, we didn't run. We didn't run from that attraction that had already done attracted us because of my mother's premonition up north of Chicago. That attraction come with us. And that's whenever I started going through close encounters of death again and again and again. And in 1983 is whenever I really went on this big investigation tour after the rubber met the road and me realizing that there was absolutely no way that I should be above ground right now, that I should have been popping up daisies in a cemetery somewhere. And that's whenever I went on this big, long quest of trying to understand why God had saved my life. And of course, it was related around a bow and arrow that my parents thought enough of that they put an engraving on my brother's tombstone towards it being a family heirloom. And then a few years later, my dad got rid of the heirloom. It's also got to do with the abusive behavior that went on in the home pertaining to post-traumatic stress disorder. It's also got to do with the community that could have cared less about James Robert Jackson's family, or they gave that appearance, because nobody that I know of confronted my dad. And as far as I know, there never was a telephone call given to the sheriff's department. And I know for a fact there wasn't no truant officer ever at our house. So I'm very familiar with evil. Just like I'm very familiar with the comfort of the Holy Spirit, God Almighty. And I'm going to continue to stand on what I stand in, believing that there will be a movement. Now, it may take a plummet before we get into that movement, but these people in Northwest Tennessee has had their opportunity of getting on board and supporting the founder of the Windmill Ministries, and still to this day, after 34 years later, I still don't have converts. I still don't have a support team. I still don't have what you'd call a congregation that supports or helps to support the Windmill Ministries missions that God placed up into my heart, going all the way back to 1988, whenever I was given my premonition. And then I actually seen a tangible, physical, not just one man, but a total of 13 men, that I've got two witnesses, Dwayne Davis and Dayton Earl Penick, that seen the same group of people at the same time that I seen them. So I know I wasn't hallucinating. I know I wasn't hallucinating.
Today.
You know, when I saw this yesterday, I was pretty brought up short. I was pretty enraged by it. And I also thought, like, so is everyone just going to be okay with this? I mean, and not like public condemnation is the be all or end all of these discussions, but it does seem to matter. And I think what we saw happen with Kanye, where you had someone who started more avowedly reciting and enunciating the most vile sorts of anti-Semitic bile, praising Hitler, all this stuff, that there's a point at which public condemnation and breaking off of business relationships happened, and I think that was an important step. Today, there were some announcements. I think he's not going to speak at APEC. There are advertisers on X who are saying they're withdrawing their ads. I think IBM, if I'm not mistaken, is one of them. I wonder how much are you heartened by seeing the reaction today, which is a reaction, it's real, and how much you think it matters?
So I think the reaction is warranted. I think we are facing a really difficult question, a sort of question you didn't face with Kanye, because Kanye had sneakers, right? But Elon Musk has invested himself and insinuated himself to some of the most important technologies around the world today. What you want to deal with climate change.
See, there was another guy not too long ago that basically was on the front burner that everybody questioned pertaining to Scientology. He was an actor I think somewhere up in Illinois was the church that he attended to. But there was all kinds of circles of suspicion that surrounded him in his Scientology religion, and he has produced some of the most intriguing, futuristic movies that I think any actor has ever been a part of. Now, I don't know if he is an actual writer. I don't know if he is what you'd call a setup man that actually plays his own movies, or if he's just going off of other people's writings. But I mean, putting all faith and religion to the side, his acting abilities, and I wish now that I know his name, and I'm sorry that I don't, because I should know his name. There's many movies that I've seen of him, but his acting abilities is top notch as far as I'm concerned. But he was at question. But you keep in mind, we're dealing with a very, very superstitious society. Whenever Ronald Reagan was president, and he was dealing a lot with I think it was Gorbachev over in Russia. He had a birthmark on top of his head, and it circulated for months, weeks, months, about that birthmark possibly being the mark of the beast. We have a society over here that has become obsessed with superstitious, but we've also got a society over here that basically knocks anybody with a strong faith, believing, outspoken ambition, regardless whether it's Scientology, regardless whether it's speaking up of what Hamas done to the Jews or whatever. We still have a society over here that is superstitious in every way imaginable, and they basically want to take good and turn it into bad, and take bad and turn it into good. And they have successfully done that to some degree because of the way that they have deceived society. And I truly believe that that's the reason why that all these horrible, horrible things continue to keep happening to society, is because God's basically given us over to a reprobate mind to believe a lie and to be damned. And until we're willing to go back to the cross and do like the Bible talks about towards getting our first works straightened out, for He's not found our works perfect yet. Until we're willing to do that, we're going to continue to be on this spiral of going downhill rather than going uphill. We are under a sublimic attack right now, that these demons are working and festering like I've never, ever, ever begun to imagine. And yes, they have become very, very powerful, but no, they cannot overpower God and God's children. But whenever you have a society that talks about God, but in reality are not serving God, then you have a society that has become dysfunctional towards basically a bunch of reprobates.
Right, you want to talk about,
and I'm not saying that everybody's like that, but I am saying that looking at it as a whole, from the masses, regardless of what community, what state, what country, whenever you get to looking at it, yes, Satan has made a very, very strong toehold on society in the 21st century.
Right, you want to talk about artificial intelligence, you got to talk to his companies. You want to talk about satellite internet that's being used in Ukraine and other war zones, right? You need to talk to him. In industry after industry, that's really important to the future of humanity, space travel, right? He has been very important. And that's part of the tragedy of this, of course, because many of those things are very good for humanity. But does that also make one person too big to fail in a way? That no matter what he says or does, we can't disentangle ourselves from it. And I don't know the answer to that question.
That's a really, really good point. Jair Rosenberg, thank you so much for making time tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, the House Ethics Committee releases its report on serial fabulist George Santos, and it's just about everything you could expect and more. The details next.
Me.
There's no doubt we are living in a time right now that even Jesus foreseen that was going to happen, of these powerful demonic spirits that was basically going to be inundating humanity to a level that Jesus said that in the last days that they would come in sheep's clothing, but literally would be ravening, raging wolves inside. Jesus knew that during this time that we was going to have artificial intelligence. He knew that we was going to have people like Jim Jones. He knew that we was going to have people like David Koresh. He knew that we was going to have people that was basically out to trick or deceive humanity in making them believe something that was just totally false. The group of people that has come up against the Windmill Ministries are the group of people that still to this day rather stand in the corner and judge me and condemn me than they would to come clean in admitting that they was wrong about me, towards how that they passed judgment on me whenever I first started going out into the eyes of the public. And now proof is in the pudding towards they was wrong. And I'm still believing what I believe. I'm still preaching what I started out preaching, even though to this day I still don't have full supporters as far as what you'd call a congregation or a church community in behind the Windmill Ministries. It just shows you how naive that society truly is, but also how stubborn that they are. They was stubborn whenever Noah preached a message of repent or face the consequences. They was stubborn in other cultures and other generations, like Sodom and Gomorrah and other great cities that have come forth in ancient times that now suddenly just disappeared off the planet. God will only tolerate a certain amount of rebellion. God will only tolerate a certain amount of disobedience. And once that occurs, he'll basically pull his divine protected hand away from the masses. Now, I've used this for an illustration. Whenever the tornado come up through here a few years ago and basically went right in behind my property here. I don't know, it could actually went out over it to some degree. But it hit over in Sharon a little bit, bypassed Sharon, but then it hit direct into Dresden. That same tornado, before it hit this area, hit Kenton, Tennessee, and then over by New Bern, Tennessee is where it dropped out of the sky. The amount of damage between all of it in the span of about a 50, 60 mile area, with that many houses that was devastated, there was still no fatalities. Because why? Because whenever people realized that they was in trouble, they started crying out to God. And God still protected them. Even though the destruction was all around them, God still protected them. And he will continue to protect us to a certain degree, especially in protecting our genuine spirit or our genuine soul. Whenever it says in the Bible that no man can pluck you from the Father's hand, that's not talking about no bad things are going to happen to the good people. See, once more, that's part of that superstitious stuff that's been brainwashed to people here on the planet. And whenever something happens to somebody, they automatically reframe and start saying, oh, that person must have done something. That was the wrath of God that come down on that person. Well, was it the wrath of God that come down on Job? Was it the wrath of God to come down on all those other prophets? Was it the wrath of God to come down on Jesus Christ? No. These was all attacks by the demonic world. Because Jesus said that we would be hated because he was hated. Jesus also said that if they attack me, they'll attack you. that if you truly have the Holy Spirit, and if you're really and truly true to God, you will have a bullseye on your back, and people will try to either manipulate you, they'll try to do you wrong, they'll try to hurt you, they'll try to set you up, they'll try to entrap you, they'll try to convince you that you're crazy and that you need to follow them, or you just need to quit this preaching on Jesus stuff, and you just need to get back out there in the world and start getting high and going to taverns and do your hanky-pankying towards jumping from one bedroom to another and just live in sin. That is the devil talking through people that comes to people like me, that is trying to get people like me off their faith, off their sense of support in the Holy Spirit. It's a warfare. It is absolutely 110% warfare, that unless you've been anointed by God towards doing something for God, towards being a whatever, a preacher, a teacher, a singer, an evangelist, a missionary, whatever, you probably can't relate to what I'm talking about until you yourself have went through similar situations, because I guarantee you, whenever the Bible says, draw nigh unto me and I will draw nigh unto you, that's true. You draw nigh unto God, God will draw nigh unto you. But as you're drawing nigh unto God and God's drawing nigh unto you, I guarantee you, Satan is going to try to penetrate your barriers in every aspect imaginable. And he's not going to come at you in ordinarily in a fierce form towards red horns and a red pitchfork and a long tail. He's going to come at you in some of the most elegant, enticing ways that you could ever think of. That's how the devil works. That's how Satan works. Just want to say God bless to our American veterans, ending up on this Veterans 2023. I don't know all that talk pertaining to Elon Musk. I don't know about all that stuff about him. If he said that he is against the Jews, that means that he's against the Christian society. I've said this before and I'll say it again. No group of people is perfect, including the Jews. Even Jesus himself, that was a Jew, whenever they'd come up to him and say, good master, and Jesus would say, there's only one good, and that's the Heavenly Father. Once more, this stereotype and this type of compartmentalizing people has been going on now for thousands of years, and I promise you it ain't going to stop just because of what's going on today. If anything, it's only going to get drastically even worse. Drastically even worse. God bless. Sorry, I'm hoarse. Sinuses, drainage. God bless America. God bless the Jews. God bless the Christian society all over the planet. God bless our troops. God bless America. And God bless our endeavors towards where we go from this moment on. Shalom.